All right, welcome. Today, we are going to dig into a really fascinating and kind of spooky piece of history. We're going to try and get inside the medieval mind to understand a fear that is so primal, it actually still echoes today. The fear of the dead who just refuse to stay dead.
So, our investigation starts with a truly chilling archaeological mystery. Over in Ireland, archaeologists uncovered some skeletons that had been treated with, well, a shocking level of violence after they had died. And the most baffling part? Big, heavy stones had been deliberately jammed into their mouths. So the question is, why? Why would anyone do that?
And look, this wasn't some minor weird thing. We're talking about experienced archaeologists, people who've seen it all, and they were just completely floored. Professor Mark Horton's reaction right here, it tells you just how bizarre and unusual this find really was. So you have to wonder, what could possibly motivate people to do something like this?
To figure that out, we've got to open the case file. Let's look at the evidence from the site itself, a place called Kiltashin. And I'll warn you, what they found reads like something straight out of a horror story.
Okay, so check this out. It wasn't just one body. They found 2 adult males with those stones crammed into their jaws. A third body was completely taken apart, kind of twisted into this unnatural shape and then pinned down under a massive rock. And their location says a lot too. They were tossed in a ditch on the very edge of the cemetery, like they were being exiled, even in death. There's a name for this, by the way. Archaeologists call them deviant burials.
So this begs the question, right? Was this just some strange local superstition in this one part of Ireland, or was something bigger going on? Well, it turns out this was just the tip of the iceberg. This was part of a much wider pattern of fear across medieval Europe.
You see, this widespread panic wasn't just about being disrespectful. No, this was about preventing the dead from coming back. The people of medieval Europe had a specific word for the thing they were so terrified of, the thing these burials were meant to stop: the revenant.
A revenant, coming from the Latin for returning, was literally one who returns. Now, it's really important to get this straight. These weren't ghosts. They weren't spirits. In the medieval imagination, these were the actual physical corpses, climbing out of their graves to walk the earth, spread disease, and bring death to the living.
And this fear was absolutely real. These weren't just campfire stories. Chroniclers of the time recorded them as fact. In a place called Stapenhill, an entire village nearly packed up and left in terror. Over in Berkeley, a woman was so convinced she'd come back that she planned her own anti-revenant burial. I mean, talk about elaborate. These accounts show a society that was genuinely gripped by a terror of the undead.
Okay, so how do we get from this gritty, terrifying, muddy medieval corpse to the suave, caped vampire that we all know today? Well, believe it or not, there's a direct evolutionary line from this ancient folk terror to modern Gothic horror.
You can actually trace the whole progression. The fear itself is ancient, right? The Kiltashin burials prove that. By the 11th and 12th centuries, people are writing these stories down. Then things really kick off in the 1700s. You get this vampire panic in Serbia, and the brand new technology of newspapers spreads the stories like wildfire all over Europe. And that's the stuff Bram Stoker would later read and use to create Dracula, basically setting the mold for the modern vampire.
But let's rewind. Let's go back to the beginning, back to those bodies in Ireland. To really understand why they were buried that way, we have to look at one of the biggest disruptions of that whole era, the arrival of Christianity. And this brings us to the main argument, the core thesis of our whole discussion.
The carbon dating on those Kiltashin skeletons delivered a massive surprise. They weren't from the 11th or 12th century, they were from the 8th century. That's a full 300 years before all those famous English stories were even written down. This just makes the whole thing even more mysterious. What on earth was happening in 8th century Ireland to create such an intense fear?
Well, historian John Blair has a really powerful theory. He argues that when a huge new belief system, like Christianity, comes in and totally disrupts ancient traditions, those old beliefs, they don't just vanish. No, they can mutate, they can twist and reemerge in some really strange and often much scarier forms.
I mean, just think about that psychological shift for a second. Pre-Christian beliefs, they often had all these established rituals for dealing with ancestors and spirits. But then the new Christian doctrine comes along, and it introduces this very structured afterlife with new ideas like purgatory, a place of torment where an evil soul might just find a way to claw its way back. This new way of seeing the world, it might have offered salvation, but it also created brand new anxieties.
So here's the key takeaway. The conversion to Christianity itself,
by tearing down the old ways and introducing these new theological fears, may have accidentally poured gasoline on this ancient fire. It may have created a heightened terror of certain people coming back from the grave. And that societal anxiety, that might just be what led the people of Kiltashin to take such drastic measures.
And if you think this is all just ancient history, something we've long moved past, well, think again. This deep-seated fear is incredibly stubborn. It's managed to survive right into our modern world.
Get this. In 2004, not 1004, 2004, in a small village in Romania, a group of men performed this exact ritual. They dug up a relative they believed had become what they call a strigoi, or undead. Now just compare these steps to that story from Stappenhill back in 1085. Dig up the body, take out the heart, burn it. It is astonishingly, chillingly similar even with 1,000 years in between.
But here's the most crucial piece of the puzzle, the key to understanding this whole thing. To us, looking in from the outside, this seems like a barbaric act, right? A desecration. But from the community's point of view, it's an act of profound compassion. They truly believe they are helping a tormented soul, someone they loved who is trapped between worlds, to finally find peace. They're not destroying a monster, they're saving a person.
And that leaves us with one final, lingering question. When we look all the way back to those bizarre burials in Ireland, with the stones in their mouths, were we looking at an act of pure hatred and fear? Or was it, in its own strange way, a desperate act of compassion, meant to save not just the living, but the dead too? It really forces us to think about what belief is, and what it can drive us to do.